Hey, welcome back to another week of Political Breakfast. We are so glad that you are here and that you are here listening on WABE. Another week, another busy week of political news. Joining me today is Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Brian Robinson off this week, and filling in for him is Ben Burnett of the Ben Burnett Show. Always glad to have you here with us as well. So hello to both of you and happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Lisa, and thank you so much for just putting on a wonderful live recording that we had last week. So special shout out and thank you to all of our loyal listeners and viewers. The room was just electric, and more importantly, the folks who asked the questions. There were so many good questions, and the dialogue and the conversations I had with people afterward was just great. So shout out to all of our loyal listeners and WABE staff for putting it on. And yeah, B-Rob this week, Lisa, I'm going to give him a little hard time because when I go away and y'all always talking about I'm on some exotic island or doing something, I am out of town. I'm at the NACO conference, National Association of County Officials, but it must be
that
something
was
really...
like a hotel room you're in there.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm on time. Microphone set up, headphones are good, but no, B-Rob must have a big client in town or something. Or something must be brewing for him to
miss.
For him to miss. So, but hey, Brian, let me get in on that retainer a little bit, man. Break a brother off a little something because for him to not be on this podcast the week of crossover. And to do it kind of, abruptly, something going on out there.
Right. But we are pleased. We are pleased to have Ben Burnett to step in. Ben, always good to see you, and you're always at the ready. And we certainly do appreciate that. And as Tharon just indicated, it is a very important week at the Gold Dome. Crossover Day, just 3-4 days away.
We got lots to look forward to. Crossover Day, it means it's about halfway through the legislative session, which means the Georgia General Assembly will be done taking your rights away before long.
Well, talk about taking away rights. Can we talk about Washington for a minute? Can we talk about what happened in Washington on Friday? Everywhere I go, people are talking about, did you see what happened between President Zelensky and President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office? And I saw excerpts, and I made myself sit down and watch it in its entirety. And I walked away just feeling almost ashamed of the United States. Not necessarily of the dialogue that was taking place, but just how the whole thing unfolded and how it was handled. And I just wanted to get some thoughts from both of you of what your thoughts were. And Ben, I'll begin with you.
Fair point. Look, it's not how I ever like to do anything in elected office. I like to have the agreements ironed out beforehand, and I think they were there. But I think you also have to know when you play from a position of strength, and I would tell your listeners and the American people, we've done certain things through the traditional avenues of diplomacy for a long time. And when you treat Russia a certain way or the Ukrainians a certain way, you don't really get anywhere. And I think that it is... Although it's not the approach I would choose to take with President Zelensky or Trump, I reserve judgment because the Biden administration had 3.5 years during this invasion to just throw money at a problem, and nobody's better off. It's not that I don't think President Biden was trying to do the wrong thing by the American people or the Ukrainian people. It just didn't get anywhere. And you can fight people to a slow death, but you also have to know that Russia has nuclear weapons because Russia and the United States in the early 90s made the Ukrainians give theirs up. And if you have that, the worst possible outcome could be a truly catastrophic event. And there's no getting around that part. That's not even political. That part's the truth. I do think that extracting mineral rights is a part of a deal. To me, I understand why. I wish that it was better handled, but when you talk about rare earth minerals, the United States is very key and central to artificial intelligence and moving in a different direction as the way we consume energy. And we don't have a lot of what the market is going to tomorrow. So if you can do two things at one time, I get it, but I am a long way from being an apologist for the administration and how they chose to go about it. Tharon?
The content was very important, but it was just the optics of how things unfolded for me that just felt very, very uncomfortable. And, just good old-fashioned manners, went out the window. So I don't know. What were your thoughts, Tharon?
Well, and Ben, thank you for being on again. It's always good to be with you. And thank you for stepping in with Brian and all the great work that you do in the state of Georgia. But Lisa, let's just go straight to it, right? You saw when President Zelensky showed up to the White House, the first few words out of the president's mouth was, he's not dressed in a suit. He doesn't have a suit on. So, off the jump, off the rip, there was a problem with President Zelensky's attire that President Trump did not like. And so you knew then, everyone was around like this was not going to go well. And I agree with Ben. Look, you're supposed to work out these deals before you have the ceremonial meeting and do that. And unfortunately, it wasn't done. So with that being said, the president did not like the way President Zelensky was presented to him based on his attire. And so that, to me, set off a very, very sort of what I knew was going to be a tough conversation. But, I reached out to a few of my friends who were from Ukraine in the Atlanta community. And there were just a couple of things they reminded me of, Lisa. And I just want to share this with our listeners. Number one, and, we have a very smart, well-informed group of people who listen to this podcast, but I don't want to assume everyone knows the historical value of this. Ukraine has been an ally of the U.S. for many, many years. And 31 years ago, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for an agreement from Russia that they would never invade them, basically, that they would never violate Ukraine's sovereignty. Mm-hmm. They broke that agreement in 2014, and they did it again in 2022. So I'm old enough to remember that when a dictator, which is what we have referred to Putin as Russians, they're not allies, they're dictators, violate one of our own, we protect them. The third point I want to make is that it was very clear to me that Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance wanted to just bully Zelensky. And for him to sit there and take it, you can have a problem with his attire. You can have a problem with him not saying thank you. And by the way, I went back and fact-checked this. I think that I saw an article where President Zelensky has actually publicly thanked the U.S. over 30 times for their outstanding commitment and financial dollars to help them in this war.
And he always dresses the same, so that was no surprise.
And he's been dressing the same. But I would say as somebody who's been to the White House, a dozen times, for events and different things, I do put on a suit because I do feel like it's the appropriate attire. But
a cultural difference,
It's a cultural difference, right? And then the other point that I want to make is that this whole thing about money, Ben alluded to it. Yes, the Biden administration has stepped up and given a lot of money to Ukraine as efforts to protect themselves. They're at war. They're at war with a foreign dictator who violated a sovereignty agreement with them, and that's what we do for our allies. But when you look at the numbers in its totality, the European Union has given more than $20 billion to this effort. And then the last thing I would say is this. We claim to be a nation that wants to put America first. All right, that's been the whole thing, with the allure that America has been second. But what we just did and how we treated him on the world stage, I think is not going to play well for us as far as other allies, knowing that when you come to Washington to meet with this president and you have reporters and a vice president who just continues to attack a man who is at war. He is there to try to figure out how he can save his people's lives. And for it to go that way and to just blatantly kind of disrespect him the way that he did, it's just interesting. And then I think that now, Lisa, you've heard me say this, we live in a world now where not a lot of Republicans are going to stand up to the Trump administration. I have not heard maybe but one or two Republicans kind of come out, and Ben did a just good job of explaining his position, but the majority of the Republicans that have responded thus far are just all in line supporting Trump, saying that he was totally fine. And I just think that there are enough Republicans out there that are left to say that you just don't air your feelings like that and attack a ally in Ukraine where innocent people were being killed and they were invaded for now all going on 3 years, And we are financially committed to them. It's gone through Congress. Members of Congress have voted for this. And I think B-Rob has mentioned in the past that this was one of the issues that divided the Republican Party as far as how much funding should be designated to Ukraine. But I just really hope that now when you see the other European leaders wrapping their arms around President Zelensky, saying that we're going to be even more committed to ending this war, supporting Ukraine, we'll see how that ultimately will play out as far as the U.S.'s role. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ben and Lisa, I don't know where we are on the agreement. I think the agreement has been put on hold.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that helps or hurts us as far as we move forward with this issue.
Yeah, Zelensky was expected to sign a deal that would give the U.S. access to Ukrainian minerals, but that has not happened yet. Josh McCoon said, I know it makes people uncomfortable when referring to that exchange. He says, though, those kinds of exchanges are not that uncommon. It's uncommon for them to be caught on camera. So those are the kind of comments that are circulating. You did have John Ossoff say the meeting was a disgraceful spectacle as the world watched the president attempt to publicly humiliate a man leading his nation's self-defense against brutal military aggression. Of course, Democratic U.S. Senator John Ossoff there. But you're right. All the Republicans who have spoken out seem to be in line with President Trump. Ben, does that surprise you? Yes or no?
It doesn't surprise me, and I think that for the most part, they're right. As I alluded to it, the first thing I said, you've done certain things for a certain way for 3.5 years, and it hasn't really gotten anywhere. And if you continue down the same path and expect Russia to just fold, it's not going to happen. They don't value human life. They will fight until they have all of Ukraine, and I think that ultimately the Trump administration, you can disagree with the tactics and you can disagree with the fact that you don't like how they talk to certain people, because I don't either. But that doesn't make what they're after ultimately wrong. And I would ask President Zelensky, would you rather be the president of 80% of what you used to have or 100% of zero? Because there is no way that France and England and the rest of Europe is going to sit there and come up with enough money to defend themselves, because they always wind up in trouble, whether it's World War II or Vietnam or whatever, and they call Uncle Sam every single time. And so I would rather see it stop now and people dislike the process that President Trump took to get there than continue down, because Senator Ossoff's not wrong. It wasn't the best look for America, but it wasn't like nothing really changed. It didn't. There's nothing that can't be done. I think that President Trump has a different way of going about things, and that's not the same way I would do things, but I think at this point he deserves the benefit of the doubt, because the Biden administration had 3.5 years to make this go away, and they couldn't.
Well, I think there was a lot of efforts to try to make it go away. I mean, there was billions of dollars spent. I think more lives would have been lost had the U.S. not stepped in. Yeah. So if you do the $150 billion that the U.S. has, I think, roughly spent thus far, the $20 billion plus from the European Union, yeah, we're probably up to about $200 billion that has been spent on the war. But I do think that there was some conflating the numbers a little bit from Trump in that number. I mean, he's been fact checked again on that. And here we are again, Lisa, having to fact check a president, right? He made that famous back in 2016 when he became president, that we had to, all the stations and networks have to go and hire all these new fact checkers, because the president and his folks are going to definitely conflate numbers and definitely spread rumors and lies. But I just think that the Ukrainian people in Atlanta that I know, let's bring this home, are still sharing stories with me that their loved ones have not been right since 2022, that they have lost people are missing. People are still starving. People are scared. This country will never, ever be the same. And we do have a robust community of Ukrainian people who are here in Georgia, who this only escalated, because we remember when the war started, there was all of this coming together as Americans to stand behind Ukraine. And that's what we do as Americans. Whenever one of our allies are attacked, we come together, we fight for them. And the first thing you do, if you know someone from that country, you call, you text, or you go visit them to make sure that you check on them. And that's who we are as Americans. So now this is sort of going to re-spark a lot of emotions, but also I think of nonviolent protest from the folks who live here in Georgia and other states to put tremendous pressure on this administration to continue to try to help this sovereign country.
Ben, anything to add to that?
I think the biggest thing that serves the American people best is that the problem nobody talks about within American politics, and especially my Republican Congress is as guilty as anybody, is that the United States doesn't have the balance sheet that it had 10 years ago, and we don't have as many options as we used to have for leverage to continue to roll $1 and $2 and what may ultimately grow to $3 or $4 trillion deficits. If you want to remain the world's currency, there are things that are going to fundamentally have to change. And you can't lean on the Democrats to do that because they like government programs. But the dirty little secret is Republicans like them too. They just like to spend it on different stuff.
Totally agree with you on that.
Well, here at home, crossover day is Thursday. And wow, that seems fast, in wake of everything that's been happening in Washington. And a lot's happening here. Again, crossover day is this Thursday, and a lot of bills we're watching. And one in particular is a school safety bill. News came that the Appalachia football coach is stepping down from his role at the school, citing PTSD, grief, and depression because of what happened at the school, the deadly shooting that happened last year. And I think that's still on the minds of many, and we wondered how that was going to factor into the session and if it would, and the timing is right. And just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. There is a school safety bill pending. Gun legislation that was being pushed by Democrats doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It seems to have stalled. So this might be the only hope in getting something done to protect the students.
A good friend of mine from childhood, we went to Parkview High School together. His name is Dallas LaDuff, and he is the superintendent of the school system up there, and just a super guy, teammate, all sorts of different things. And to see the coach at Appalachia High School come out and talk about that, man, how could you go through something like that and be okay? And there's not I'm so good for him for saying that, but there's no way you could be okay. I think that school safety, you tie them all back. I'm one of the only Republicans who will come out and say this is I'm not necessarily with the Democrats with what they want with respect to guns and gun culture in American politics, but this is an issue that especially suburban voters, women, identify with. And there are so many problems that we have in the Republican Party that we can't even have an honest conversation about what should and shouldn't be covered under the Second Amendment. And this is probably the reason why I could never return to elected office as a Republican, but you can't convince me that that anybody should be able to walk around with a 100-round magazine and a semi-automatic weapon with a bump stock. It's nonsensical. And if that, I could get ostracized in all sorts of ways. I wouldn't say most Republicans, but enough of them to do a lot of damage agree with me entirely. And I wish that the Georgia General Assembly would wake up and realize that although I will never say that the Democrats are right, I hope they force.
We're right sometimes.
I hope. Well, I don't want to get rid of all the weapons, but there's just no reason for somebody like me to have a bump stock, an AR-15, and a 300-round magazine. It's a nonsensical argument.
So, Lisa, the one thing that I probably finished 2024 talking about almost more than the election and the actual leading up to election day and election outcome was the horrific murder, unnecessary horrific murders that we saw at Appalachia High School. It is something that I think Republicans and Democrats came together on for about a few weeks, and then it kind of died down. And then I and others went on this sort of messaging to sort of encourage legislators to make this a top priority when they went back to the session in January. So I want to start off by commending Speaker Burns and the folks in the Senate who have come back and actually introduced some legislation. And we're going to see, particularly if this crosses over, that the House Bill 268, is going to, be one of the ones that folks are going to be paying very close attention to leading up to crossover. As Ben just did, let's bring it home. I grew up in Athens, Georgia, just a few, 30 minutes, if that, from Appalachian High School. And many people in that Wanda Bear community have not recovered. And so for me to hear that the high school football coach, who has done a phenomenal job of trying to keep those women and men, those student athletes together, not just the players on the football team, but their trainers, there's cheerleaders. There's so many people in that sports athletic departments there that have just been traumatized by this senseless murder happened with a 14-year-old who was allowed to get a gun, multiple guns, but have a gun that he got from his house, one of whom, which we've got to remember, was gifted to him for his birthday, who traveled from a school who had a troubled past. It was identified. And so that's when I hear like State Senators Emmanuel Jones say, hey, we need a statewide database that everyone can opt into to make sure that if Tharon Johnson, hypothetically, is having issues at one school and then my parents, for whatever reason, decide to move to another county, that those counselors, those teachers, those assistant principals, those principals have that database readily available to them. Not that you're targeting me, not that I'm just going to be just treated differently, but I do need some supervision. I need to be checked on. Like, what is my mental capacity? How am I doing? What's going on at home? And so Democrats are saying, hey, good first step, but we do got to have a conversation about tougher storage laws. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I also believe in responsible gun ownership. Ben said it best. I don't even know what a buckshot, all that stuff you just mentioned. Like most of us being in the black community, we have guns, but shoot, some of those things some of those things you were talking about, that's some war stuff or hunting, right? But when I grew up in Athens, my grandfather used to tell me, don't you go hunting with those white folks because you may not come back, right? So
it's probably strong.
No. That's what. No, I think a lot. I keep it real on this podcast. You go hunting with people who you trust and who you know, right? When I grew up, you don't go there with people who you don't know. And I'm just saying, man, I grew up in Athens. I had some white friends, but the majority of my friends were black and Hispanic. I digress. So the last thing I would say is this. I want to also commend the governor. Before the session started, he allocated $600 million in the state budget to deal with prisons and deal with all that. But it was also a recommitment by the speaker, lieutenant governor, senators to focus on school safety. To me, Lisa, you know what I'm about to say. I think we need to have a trained, armed, resource training officer in every single school in the state of Georgia, especially including elementary schools. The technology to alert folks when something happened, yes, Georgia has made some strides there. But I do think that the biggest thing that parents come to me about right now is when I drop my kid off to school or he or she goes on the school bus, will they come back home to me safely? I've seen some schools beef up their security, bring on people, but I want to stress the training because we don't want to, we don't want to arm teachers. I think that was a Republican proposal that I think Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, had kind of floated back 2 years ago. I think that's a little too extreme. But what I do think we need to do is to make sure that there's funding and recruitment and retention strategies in place to get women and men who want to go to these schools, who are there beyond just the metal detectors, and make sure that these teachers and these kids remain safe. But definitely pray for the family of this football coach who unfortunately is suffering from PTSD and other anxiety issues from this horrific murder. And if there's anyone else that needs help, that is follow the bravery of this head football coach to say, hey, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm going to step aside and heal. And I think we got to be specific about this, Lisa, because we live in this bold new country where America first, and you got to be this tough guy. But it's got to be a little bit of levity to this, where you got to give people an opportunity to have a safe place to be vulnerable and say, hey, I need some help.
Yeah, his name is Mike Hancock, and he said, it is through God's grace and me humbling myself before the cross that I am seeking the mental health and healing that I need to be myself again. It was one of his defensive coordinators who was killed, in addition to 2 faculty members and 2 students. So our hearts and prayers still go out to the victims and the victims' families of the Appalachia High School shooting. What else are we watching? Crossover Day, besides gun and school safety, tort reform.
Yeah.
I know Brian was here. Brian would be watching tort reform, and you are too as well.
Everyone is watching tort reform. And Ben, I'll go quick because I know you probably got something to say about that. Look, it passed the Senate. It was a very Republican Democratic vote. I think only one Democratic senator voted for it, Emanuel Jones. So now it's in the House. The Speaker has put together a special committee to allow Democrats and Republicans to debate the bill to make sure it's transparent. I think they had one hearing, not this week, but last week. Senator Kennedy, who's the president pro tem of the Senate, presented the bill. Democrats had an opportunity to cross-examine him, ask a lot of questions, and he definitely, promoted the bill. So we'll see what happens. I think there's going to be another meeting this week. But ultimately, the bill right now sits in the Rules Committee, where it's there, and then it'll continue to be debated in the committee that the Speaker has put together with Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, I giggled only because I heard Brian immediately say in my ear, tort reform, tort reform's coming. So, yeah. Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that having conversations when you've seen states like Florida who have seen a lot of growth, more growth than Georgia, and you see what they have put forward, there are places that I would model. I had a conversation with a risk insurance adjuster for an out-of-state university ask about this very thing. And the truth is that you don't want to see it. And I'm not running to California like Republicans love to talk about what's wrong. But you don't want to get to a place where you see where large-scale insurance providers leave the market in a very, very quick fashion because they no longer think that it is a safe or a just place to do business where they can't turn a dollar. And at the same time, I wish that the Republican Party in the state of Georgia would do a better job of explaining what tort reform is and how it makes my life better.
Right.
The other thing
that's always been the conversation here is like, does the average Joe care about this?
The average Joe will care when they no longer have the proper insurance coverages and places don't want to insure it anymore. But I think that message should be more front and center to people like me who I don't have any clients in the space. And the other bill that I want to highlight is the online sports gaming. I can't wait to see what happens. I think the votes may finally be there. We will see what happens. Georgia's like 1 of 10 or 12 that doesn't have one. And when you start getting lumped in with places like Alabama, it makes you ask questions if you're doing a good job.
Yeah,
Oops.
You know what? Here we go. I'm glad you brought that up because I have a couple more, but let's let our listeners know what's going on here. I think, Lisa, we've been doing this podcast. I saw a picture of me and B-Rob when B-Rob didn't have any gray hair back in 2016, and we were talking about sports betting probably, I think, back in 16 or 17, but there was a new House resolution drop, House Resolution number 450, last week, surprisingly, and to Ben's point, I mean, I think the strategy had kind of been to keep this on the low, but it has a lot of sponsors, people who dropped this bill. But here's what I would say about it. Someone who's worked on this previously, it's going to come down to two things. Will the Republicans who have a spiritual, religious issue with gambling in its entirety, right? The whole fact that it's an addiction and the negative consequences, can they get over that and hear from their constituents? Because we've seen poll after poll in Georgia, it passes. People want it, but will it be responsible betting? The second issue with this is that how are you going to divvy up the licenses, right? You got the FanDuels of the world. You got Prize Picks. You got DraftKings. But then you have the big,
baby. Can't wait.
Yeah, I was going to say one that was going to set you off, Ben. I'm not mentioning any of them because none of them paid me, Lisa, to advocate for them. But anyway, then you got to also talk about what are you going to do with our sports teams? Will those sports teams we have here, the Falcons, the Hawks, the Braves, it's Atlanta United, the Atlanta Falcons, and then also, what are you going to do with the big casinos? There's been people here right now in Atlanta, Lisa, who's holding on to land because they think that one day we will eventually have online that will sort of set the president to go to maybe having casinos. And so it's all about how you create the licenses to not only bring sports betting, but does it lead to ultimately other casino gambling in Georgia? So you got to either separate the two, which I think this is what this group is going to do, and not let the others to kind of like infiltrate it and put something out there that Republicans will probably have a problem with. And then the last thing, Lisa, will the Democratic caucus shut down? This is what they've done in the past.
Wow.
You don't give them what they want. Either the Senate Democratic Caucus or the House Democratic Caucus will shut down and lock down their votes if there's not enough bargaining and horse trading going on with the Republicans on this particular issue.
Well, they better get to horse trading because I want to gamble.
You want to gamble? I feel you. Well,
Yeah.
we can actually. I mean, it's gambling in Georgia right now. It's called the Georgia Lottery. So people play the lottery every.
Don't give me that. I want to.
Just
I want to
$2
wake
here
up
and there. Yeah.
I want to wake up on Saturday morning and take my best swing on the SEC schedule.
Ah, there you go. There you go. Oh, you're big time. You're big time gambler.
Not really. I'm like $5.
Transgender issues talked about quite a bit. I don't know, Tharon, you spent some time down there. Did you hear anything in the hallways?
Man, no. I mean, how can you not hear it? I mean, Speaker Burns, every speech he gives, he talks about a few things. He talks about mental health. He talks about tort reform. He talks about dealing with school safety, which is one of his bills. But he always talks about how he does not believe that men should be playing in girls' sports. I mean, I've heard it so much where I can kind of repeat it. Democrats are doing their best to try to articulate the concerns of the families. Many parents who have children who have decided to make a decision in their life to change, from being a boy to a girl and girl to a boy, whether or not they want to play in sports. We've seen the outrage from some folks of how that's divided us. It played out on a national scale, but it looks like it's got momentum. And as Brian would say if he was here, all politics are national right now. And so you see that the state is kind of emulating what we've seen happen on a national level.
That's true. Yeah, a lot of national narratives right here in Georgia. Immigration, same thing. All right. Well, anything else you want to add before we wrap up? Ben, always a pleasure to have you stop by and add your insight.
I love talking to you guys. It's come. I always, anytime I'm on NPR, I feel like I'm in a safe space, which is not always the case in the Republican mean streets. So I love it. The only one I would tell you that I think has some legs and at least worth a meritocratic conversation is around the license plate readers and the reform that may take place, because there's a lot of House members that are not happy with the punitive nature of buying toys for police departments and places that don't necessarily need it, and a lot of people that get popped on those license plate readers. It's going to be interesting. I think there were several dozen sponsors in the House who want to see that kind of augmented and framed, and I think that's something. Look, I've gotten license plate reader speeding tickets, and I mean, I was guilty for speeding through a school zone. You can't get around it, but it's definitely good politics there.
And Lisa, one more, and I'll do B-Rob a solid, even though he don't take care of me when he's on here with Saba. But I'll B-Rob, I'm gonna do you a solid because I know if you were on right now, you would talk about this. But the other thing that I know he's personally been working on for a while is the legislation that will deal with wrongful convictions.
Yeah,
and this is a bipartisan bill. So we're talking about House Bill 533 and Senate Bill 176. They have not received committee votes yet, but this is one that will deal with, will they move the compensation process out of the legislature and instead have a third-party panel with determining if someone recently released from prison should be compensated and how much they should receive. And so that's been a big movement that's caused a lot of conversations at the Capitol. So again, it's got to get through committee and it's got to get out of one of the chambers before Thursday. But I know that is one that Brian would mention if he was on today, and I know that one is getting a lot of discussion from Democrats and Republicans about the process and who would this third party be. And you see these folks, Lisa, and they're not just one race. They're all races, different ages, who were down in the Capitol who've been wrongfully convicted, crimes and have tried to come out and get a second chance at life in the Georgia community.
Well said. All right, guys. It's going to be quite the week. A lot to talk about next week as well. Ben, again, thanks for joining us and filling in for Brian. Brian will be back next week. Tharon, thanks as always. And y'all have a great week. What sports team? We normally end cheering on some sports team, but what's going on now?
It's March, all month long, baby. Basketball season starts right now. And we're going to watch it
March
clear
Madness.
through June.
It's around the corner. How could I forget?
Man, I'm gonna take a personal privilege. First, before I do the sports, though, Lisa, but happy Women's History Month. You know, we as Democrats, we celebrate women.
Yes,
we believe that you all should be seen, heard, and celebrated every single day. So happy Women's History Month to you and Lily and all the other women at WABE. But then I'm just not like how my boy Ant-Man right now. You know, he's going through some stuff. He was recently suspended. You know, we love Ant-Man here in the A. Keep doing your thing, bro. He came out recently and said he don't want to be the face of the NBA, and LeBron defended him because he said it's a lot of pressure with that. But just want Ant-Man to know, man, we support you, brother. Keep grinding, but come off this suspension. And
when you get that level, something must be really going on behind the scenes. Some pressure.
He's getting a little frustrated. He got some double checks and threw the ball in the stands, but he's a great athlete, playing great ball, so I want to give him a shout out.
All right, some encouragement as well. And rest in peace, Angie Stone.
Oh my God, sad. Yeah, definitely condolences to her family. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Lisa.